Welcome to the Sea Files, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell notification if you want notifications of this video coming out, or these videos coming out. It is Friday. My wife and I attended a funeral this morning. A lot of people are losing their lives, folks. And that's another subject, though, that I'm going to be talking about today. But there's a lot of shenanigans going on, and people are losing their lives, and it needs to come to a stop. You can't do anything about sin. Sin causes death, but you can do something about evil people intentionally doing stuff that harms other people. You can do things about that. Well, they've got someone in custody from the Charlie Kirk shooting. I don't have his name in front of me right now, but does it really matter? It's going to be all over the internet. You'll know what it is soon, if you don't already know. 22 years old, the son of a police officer, and I think it was maybe a police sergeant from what was being reported, but I can't be positive on that. At any rate, his dad, the police officer, figured out that he was the one who did it and turned him in. Imagine being a father and having to turn your son in because your son did something like that. Wow. That is, I can't even imagine how tough that was for that police officer dad. But it does show that his dad had integrity and was not willing to compromise his own integrity, even for the benefit of his own son. That gives me hope for this country. It gives me hope for the profession of law enforcement. But the question is, what happened here? What happened here? Why did this young man do what he did? I'll give you my thoughts on it. I was saying, and I'm not the only one saying it, there are a number of snipers and experts that have said the same thing, that it took some skill to make that shot. Now, maybe the answer is right in front of us. If you had a police officer dad who obviously trained with a carbine in his job, and you got to remember, a lot of police officers are veterans. I spent time in the military before I went into law enforcement, and I was shooting an M16A1 and M16A2 before they went to the M4. When I was in the military, hitting targets at 500 yards. When I was training with I trained with the Seabees. I've trained Marine Corps and Army on shooting those rifles. So if his dad had that kind of training, then his dad was probably taking him out and doing things that dads would normally do with sons, and say, hey, let's go to the range and let's do some rifle range practice and things like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that on the I mean, dads all over the country do that with their kids. So that should not be demonized. There's nothing wrong with that. Many people's lives have been saved because young men and young women have been trained on how to properly use a firearm. And as a result, many crimes have been stopped and many would-be victims have been saved because somebody with a firearm was able to save them from horrible harm. So the weapon itself is only an instrument. It's only a tool to be used for good or to be used for evil. They could be used either way. But the fact that this young man had the skill to be able to hit that shot the way he did, I knew he had to have some kind of training to do that. Here's the other factor to think about in this, and this is where I'm going to go with this video. How did he figure out how to sneak in, take the shot, and then sneak out? Where did he get that training? I don't think his police officer dad would have trained him on something like that. Well, we know from history, recent history, and from people coming out and talking about this, like Bill Cooper, who wrote The Committee of 300, former intelligence operator and researcher, people who have written about the Tavistock Institute, and so forth, who have revealed that these intelligence agencies like the CIA, Mossad, MI6 have done these operations and experiments. And just after World War II, I'll give you a little bit of history. And this is not conspiracy theory stuff, folks. I'm giving you what I have studied from these folks that have come out and said, yeah, this is what's actually happening. I worked with the agency. I know what was going on, right? And they've written books. Bill Cooper was under a lot of threat. They wanted to take him out because he was revealing things they didn't want him to reveal. But I read a book about this thick that he wrote, and man, that book was pumped full of stuff that just would blow your mind. Anyway, a little bit of history. Tavistock Institute started just after World War II in England, and it was put together by MI6, the CIA. The Mossad was not involved at that point. And the purpose of it was to figure out how to get information out of spies, like, spies from the Soviet Union or whoever would be spying on the country. If they catch the spy, how do they interrogate the spy in a way that they can get information out of the spy and then turn around and return that spy to his home country, erase his memory so that he doesn't even know he was even captured, and then the other country has no idea that they've been compromised on information. Well, that's where the Tavistock Institute came in. And so they began to work on that problem. Well, the solution they came up with was some mind control techniques that are explained in the book, both in Cooper's book and in the book I read called The Tavistock Institute, from a good researcher that dug all this up and had good connections, and others. I mean, multiple sources have revealed this. And really, the agencies don't even deny it anymore that institute existed. They used drugs, and they used certain mind control techniques. For example, they'd put the person into an empty room. They would choose a particular song, a certain type of music, and they would play that song repeatedly, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then they would cut the song off, take the person outside, and let him sit and just relax and get his mind, a little bit of the mind torture ends for a short time. Shoot him up with some more drugs, and boom, right back in the room, and play the song again. And there's some other things involved in the mind brainwashing, the mind control techniques that they were using. You'd have to read the book to really learn about all of it. But anyway, it turned out to be successful, the bottom line. They were able to extract information out of foreign spies and then return them to their home country, and the spies, once their mind was, the memory was washed of what had happened, they'd send them home. And they came to realize that, hey, wait a minute, these techniques can be used on entire societies. This will work. We can actually affect entire societies with this technique that we've developed. So the first society they attempted to do it on and they experimented with was Germany. Believe it or not, it was Germany. And they said, you know what? This will work on America. So what happened in the 60s? The drug culture. Well, who was behind that? According to these sources, it was the CIA, MI6, and other intelligence agencies, using techniques right out of the Tavistock Institute. So that's why drugs came flooding into the United States. That's why right now, as the current administration is taking a serious aim at shutting down the drug trade, you see people starting to go ballistic because it's messing up their plans. Anyway, they said, well, how do we do the other part of it? You know, the drugs alone is not going to work. The drugs really set up the mind to be vulnerable so that it can be manipulated. So how do we manipulate an entire society? The answer came with an operation called Operation Mockingbird. And that's when intelligence agencies infiltrated the media. NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, go down the list. And so they took their expertise in propaganda. They flooded drugs into the United States. They drugged up a bunch of people, and then put out a lot of propaganda through the news. So they figured out how to use the education system to do the same thing. You dumb people down, and then you feed them the propaganda, and they just buy into it. So that's what happened in the 60s, in the 70s, the 80s, and on up. When social media started becoming prominent because of the invention of the internet and all of that, they knew that, well, we can't just do it through the news media anymore. It's not just television now. We have to figure out a way to infiltrate social media. And then that's where all of that controversy comes in, into social media, where they're talking about misinformation and protecting people from misinformation. And, in other words, shutting down the concept of free thinking, because that's a threat to their agenda. And that's where that came from. So you end up with an entire society that has been the victim of mind control techniques. And then they feed that society whatever propaganda they want to feed it. And voila, you have a societal control, which was their goal when they set out to do that experiment just after World War II through the Tavistock Institute. All right, we're going to have to bring another element into this to get the full picture. In Germany, around that time, there was a thing called the Frankfurt School. And in the Frankfurt School, they were trying to figure out how to turn Europe and the United States into communist states. How do you do that? Karl Marx and his economic theory, that worked in transforming Russia into the Soviet Union all the way up until the early 90s, when the Soviet Union fell through perestroika, and after the Berlin Wall fell and all that, perestroika was change occurring in the Soviet Union, and eventually went back to being Russia, and they dropped the communism. But that's a different story. But initially, the economic theory did work. It also worked in China with the Mao Revolution and all of that. But it didn't work in the United States. They could not get it to work in the United States. And they figured out that because of the free enterprise system, and because of the capitalism that's in the United States, trying to stir the poor up in this country and be successful in pushing a communist revolution in America the way they did in China and Russia was not being successful. But what they did figure out was that the Achilles heel of the United States is ethnicity, race relations. And so they began to devise a way to take down the United States by means of race relations. They had to divide the country by race, by ethnicity, and they had to get the different ethnicities fighting with each other. And with that, they figured they could have kind of a soft, quiet revolution that would thrust the United States into communism. Well, lo and behold, that began to work. And the country was descending very slowly and softly, but successfully, into becoming a communist state. And so you combine the Frankfurt School with the mind control techniques of the Tavistock Institute, and you have a soft revolution in the United States to turn it into a communist state. All right. So what do you do if you need to try to push violence in the country? Well, you need if you're going to start a fire, you need a spark, right? You need to strike a match, put it down into the kindling to start the fire. So what was the match that they were trying to use to start the fire? Well, the solution is you radicalize young, vulnerable minds. You do it through Tavistock Institute techniques, and you use critical race theory, which came out of the Frankfurt School as part of the attempt to use race to do a soft coup against the United States and turn it into a communist state. The theory that the Frankfurt School came up with is called critical race theory, and you take that theory and you use it to radicalize young minds that are vulnerable. You use the Tavistock Institute methods to use mind control. So you pick certain individuals, you use those techniques on them, radicalize them, give them some training on how to use a high-powered rifle, for example, a little bit of sniper type training to pull off these acts. And what do you end up with? You end up with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. You end up with the assassination of Jack Kennedy. You end up with the assassination of Martin Luther King. You end up with the assassination, or attempted assassination, of George Wallace, governor of Georgia back in the 60s. You end up with the school shootings, the church shootings, and now attempt shootings against Trump, and you end up with this latest one, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So when you start reading in the media that this young 22-year-old man was a radical Trump hater, and so forth, the question you need to ask yourself, understanding that background of the Frankfurt School, critical race theory, and the Tavistock Institute, and all of that, the first question we have to ask ourselves is simple. Who funded it? Who radicalized the young man? Who used the Tavistock techniques on him? And how do we trace back to them? Because you have to cut off the head of the snake to stop this senseless violence. You can't just arrest the shooter and leave it at that. You've got to trace it back to the person who funded it, the people who trained him how to do that, the people who, sold him the drugs, the people who radicalized him in critical race theory, the people who radicalized him to a point where he would be willing to commit violence against the people that are to become the targets based upon the people that, the people who radicalized him want to be targeted. You have to take the entire network down. these black swan operations, these false flag operations, all built through intelligence agencies, all built through this use of psychology and sociology as a weapon against people. So the entire apparatus, the entire system has to be taken down. So when people are screaming and yelling, where's the Epstein list? Where's the Epstein list? Things like that. That's a simple-minded way of viewing what's going on. That's not thinking deep enough. If good people in government are investigating the Epstein list, if it actually exists, I've not seen proof yet that a list actually exists, even though there's a pretty strong indication it does. Then you'd want to conduct a thorough investigation into that. Well, if you release the list to the public, guess what you've just done? You've compromised your investigation. And so you release the list like the people want, and guess what? Nobody's prosecuted, nobody's indicted, nobody goes to prisoner, because you've just compromised your investigation. But the people are happy because you released it. You released the list. Now they can know who to scream at on the street and be mad at when they see them in public. Oh, okay, well, big deal. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really going to accomplish a whole lot. You know, that now we got them now. We can scream at them on the street. So people think very shallow. And why? Well, because they've never been taught how to think deeper. You don't get that out of the education system. I don't care if you got a master's degree or a PhD. These days, you're not taught how to think. So, the next question is this. Why Charlie Kirk? All right. So this is the final part. Why Charlie Kirk? It's because he was extremely effective in what he was doing. He was effective in unradicalizing young people, reversing the effects of a propaganda news media and a propaganda education system, reversing the effects of social media on these kids, reversing the effects of Tavistock Institute. How did he do it? He taught them how to think. He taught them how to think. He taught them how to ask questions. You see, for mind control to be successful, the mind has to be in such a state that it doesn't ask questions. It doesn't have doubt. It doesn't challenge any of the paradigms and premises used to push certain narratives. It never does that, because to do so would be heretical, and it's really placed in the minds of these young folks that have been so affected by this, and my generation too, because they were doing it in the 60s. That you never question this. Okay? If you do question it, then you are name your favorite word, racist, homophobe, xenophobe. Go down the list. It's heretical. It's heresy, which tells you you're dealing with a religious cult when it comes to critical race theory and other things created by the Frankfurt School. Now, so because Charlie was so effective in reversing the effects that they wanted to have on society, somebody along the way decided that he had to be removed from the equation so that they could continue to use mind control techniques on people in society and force them to think the way they want them to think. And remember, during this pandemic that they faked, they were using the same techniques. Everybody had to walk in lockstep with what the propaganda that was being shoved through the medical industry was saying to society. Same thing, just that they used the medical industry for their means at that point in time. And those who resisted, well, they were severely punished. They were putting out misinformation. They were conspiracy theorists. They were putting out they were heretical. They would not conform, and therefore they're cast out of the camp, if you will, to use an old Bible phrase. So Trump is a disruptor. He's from outside the camp. He's not a part of the Bilderberg group. He's not a part of critical race theory. He's not a part of the Tavistock Institute. He's not a part of Skull and Bones. He's not a part of any of these secret societies and stuff that seek to control the world, control society. He's a monkey wrench thrown into the machinery and works of the globalist machine that sought to use these techniques I've been talking about in this entire video to fundamentally change society and push it toward being more communistic in its state. Well, that means that you have to attack Christianity as well, because Christianity is a hindrance to communism. And that's where all of it comes from. So that's why they targeted Charlie Kirk. That's why they've been trying to target Donald Trump. They won't stop. They're going to target you and me. They're going to target, people like Steve Bannon, people like, Shapiro, Dan Shapiro, people like Alex Jones, people like Megyn Kelly. There's so many people out there that are really trying to push back against this evil narrative that's being thrown at us. I can't even name all of them. But they're all going to be targeted. And they want to try to just go down the line, take out the most prominent people, and then come after just everyday people that just don't want to conform to communism, and people who don't want to conform to the brainwashing. Here's the problem, and we'll leave on this. Their attempt to start a race war, their attempt to start this, we're going to start taking people out by targeting Charlie Kirk has fundamentally backfired on them. The response they thought they would get, intimidation, cower in the corner, don't say anything, shut up, don't be vocal, don't go be a private Christian, don't be a public Christian, or we will target you. Well, to use Nero as an example, we'll feed you to the lions. It didn't work. Christians are now more emboldened than ever before in this country. And those who are against communism, they're anti-communist, they're pro-capital, pro-capitalist, pro-free enterprise, they're emboldened more than ever today. So effectively, what they did in their miscalculation is they created a monster that is basically going to crush the globalist plans. God is using this to utterly destroy this elitist evil that has enslaved societies since I was a kid. To put it another way, for those of you who know the story of Haman and Mordecai in the Bible, Haman is going to hang and is starting to hang on the gallows he built for Mordecai. It's game over. They made a massive, huge mistake, because all of those young college students that looked up to Charlie Kirk, some of them whose lives were transformed and changed for the better because of Charlie Kirk, they are all going to become Charlie Kirks. There's not one Charlie Kirk now. There are thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. And so a flood of anti-globalists are going to rise up and push back, and the people that were trying to control everything, trying to lock us down and trying to shut us up, trying to enslave us economically and so forth, I think they're going to find that there's going to be a tidal wave hitting them that they will be incapable of stopping. They won't be able to stop it. It's going to utterly destroy them. Remember what Joseph told his brothers: you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God will. Psalm chapter 2, go read it. God will have the last laugh. Thanks for watching. God bless. I'll see you next time on the C-Files.